Imagine this. You're a high-powered CFO on a business trip, and suddenly you're being hauled off a plane in handcuffs. Falsely accused of theft. Your career, your reputation, everything you've worked for hangs in the balance. This is Amara Johnson's nightmare, and it's just the beginning. But Amara has a secret weapon, one that will expose the real criminals and send shockwaves through the system. A secret that could change everything. If you're intrigued by stories of courage and resilience, and you love seeing justice prevail, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button to join our community and be the first to see how Amara's story unfolds. You won't want to miss a single chapter. The gentle hum of the aircraft lulled most passengers into a state of drowsy contentment. But for Amara Johnson, sleep was a distant notion. She gazed out the window, the clouds a swirling canvas of white and gray, mirroring the mix of emotions churning within her. The successful business trip, the anticipation of returning home to her family, the lingering sting of a microaggression encountered at the airport. It all swirled together, a complex cocktail of triumph and unease. Amara adjusted her crisp blazer, a subtle armor against the world's casual dismissals. As a black woman, a chief financial officer in a world still dominated by men, she'd learned to navigate the subtle slights, the underestimations that prickled like tiny needles. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, a testament to her hard-won achievements and the unwavering support of her family and community. But beneath that confident exterior lay a lingering vulnerability, a shadow cast by a childhood incident she couldn't quite shake off. The memory flickered through her mind. A sneering face, a hurled insult, the feeling of helplessness as she watched her father being unjustly accused of theft. It had been a formative experience, shaping her sense of justice and fueling her determination to succeed. A sudden jolt of turbulence brought her back to the present. Glancing around the cabin, she observed the tapestry of humanity that made up her fellow passengers. An elderly couple dozing peacefully, a young mother struggling to soothe a fussy baby, a group of teenagers excitedly discussing their vacation plans. A middle-aged man in a worn baseball cap avoided her gaze, while a woman in a stylish pantsuit shot her a look that could curdle milk. It was a microcosm of society itself, a mix of indifference, judgment, and the occasional spark of human connection. And then, her eyes settled on him. He sat a few rows ahead, radiating an aura of entitlement. Hartley, she'd heard the flight attendant call him. Immaculately dressed, silver hair slicked back, he exuded an air of wealth and privilege. He'd been staring at her intermittently, a flicker of disapproval in his eyes each time their gazes met. It was the kind of look Amara knew all too well, a judgment that ran deeper than her attire or her seat in first class. A wave of nausea washed over her as she recalled the incident at the airport. A security guard, eyes lingering on her skin a moment too long, had insisted on a more thorough check of her bag. "Just protocol, ma'am," he'd said with a dismissive smile. But the implication hung heavy in the air, a reminder that even in her tailored suit and with her boarding pass in hand, she was still seen as a potential threat. Suddenly, a commotion erupted a few rows ahead. Hartley was on his feet, his face contorted in rage. "My wallet." "It's gone," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the cabin's quiet hum. His accusing eyes darted around, finally settling on Amara. "You," he snarled, pointing a finger at her. "I saw you eyeing my briefcase. You took it." Amara's heart pounded in her chest, the childhood memory flashing before her eyes. "Sir, I assure you, I have nothing to do with your wallet," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. But Hartley, a man accustomed to getting his way, was beyond reason. Fueled by a lifetime of privilege and an ingrained sense of superiority, he launched into a tirade. "Don't play innocent with me," he spat. "People like you are always looking for a handout, trying to take what's not yours." A young man sitting nearby shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "That's not right," but quickly fell silent when Hartley glared in his direction. A woman across the aisle leaned over and whispered to her companion, "Well, she does look suspicious." Amara felt a wave of despair wash over her. It was like being trapped in a nightmare where no one could hear her pleas. The flight attendant rushed over, attempting to de-escalate the situation, but Hartley was unrelenting. "Call the police," he demanded. "This woman is a thief." Within minutes, the plane was met at the gate by 2 police officers. Hartley, red-faced and breathless, recounted his accusations, embellishing the story with each retelling. The officers, one young and eager to impress, the other older and weary but still susceptible to unconscious bias, listened with varying degrees of skepticism. "Ma'am, please step off the plane," the younger officer said to Amara, his voice firm but his eyes betraying a hint of uncertainty. Amara felt a wave of panic wash over her, the childhood fear threatening to resurface. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong," she pleaded, her voice trembling now. "Please, just look at my boarding pass, my itinerary. I have no reason to steal anything." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The officers, swayed by Hartley's forceful demeanor and their own ingrained biases, insisted on taking her into custody. As they led her off the plane, handcuffs biting into her wrists, Amara felt a familiar sting of injustice, a sense of helplessness that threatened to consume her. The cabin fell silent, the passengers watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity, judgment, and a chilling indifference. Only one pair of eyes offered a glimmer of compassion, an elderly woman with a gentle smile. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small, worn Bible, and clutched it tightly to her chest, her lips moving in silent prayer. Amara clung to that fleeting moment of human connection as she was escorted through the jet bridge, the weight of expectations and the sting of injustice heavy on her shoulders. But deep within her, a spark of defiance ignited. She would not be silenced. She would not be a victim. She would fight. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Amara's wrists, a stark contrast to the warmth of the Arizona sun streaming through the jet bridge windows. Each clank of the metal echoed the pounding of her heart, a drumbeat of disbelief and rising indignation. She walked alongside the officers, her head held high, a mask of composure barely concealing the turmoil within. As they entered the terminal, a cacophony of sounds assaulted her ears, the rumble of luggage carousels, the announcements blaring over the loudspeaker, the chatter of hurried travelers. A small crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Amara felt their eyes on her, stripping away her dignity, reducing her to a spectacle. Whispers followed her like a shadow. Did she really steal something? She looked so calm. Maybe she's guilty. The weight of those unseen eyes, the silent accusations, threatened to crush her. The officers led her to a small, sterile room, the air thick with the scent of disinfectant. The walls were bare except for a faded poster outlining passenger rights, a cruel irony in Amara's current situation. She sank onto the hard plastic chair, its coldness seeping through her skirt. The handcuffs dug into her wrists with each movement, a constant reminder of her unjust confinement. She closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill, her chest constricting with a familiar panic. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Not after all she had overcome. The younger officer, whose name tag read Officer Miller, paced the room, his youthful face etched with uncertainty. He kept glancing at Amara, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and something akin to pity. His partner, a grizzled veteran named Sergeant Davis, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression a mask of indifference. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions," Officer Miller began, his voice hesitant. Amara took a deep breath, summoning her composure. "Officer, I've told you, I didn't steal anything. This is a misunderstanding." Sergeant Davis snorted. "Sure it is. Happens all the time. Folks like you, always playing the victim." Amara felt a surge of anger, hot and prickly, rising in her throat. "Folks like me? What's that supposed to mean?" "You know what I mean," Davis muttered, his eyes filled with disdain. Officer Miller cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Ma'am, We have a witness who claims to have seen you near the victim's belongings." "That's ridiculous," Amara exclaimed. "I was in my seat the entire flight, except for when I went to the restroom." "Sure you were," Davis said sarcastically. "And I'm the Queen of England." Amara's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. Helplessness washed over her, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. She was trapped in a system that seemed designed to work against her, where her word held no weight against the accusations of a privileged white man. The memory of her father, falsely accused and humiliated, flashed through her mind, fueling her anger and determination. Suddenly, a news report flashed across the small television screen mounted in the corner of the room. A black teenager had been fatally shot by police during a routine traffic stop. The news anchor's voice droned on about the tragic incident and the ongoing investigation. Amara felt a surge of despair. Another life lost, another injustice perpetrated. The statistics scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Black Americans were 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. The numbers blurred in her vision, a stark reminder of the systemic bias that permeated society. She looked up at the officers, their faces illuminated by the flickering screen. Miller seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze darting between Amara and the TV. Davis, however, remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the television, a flicker of something cold and unreadable in their depths. Amara knew she couldn't remain silent. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the black men and women who had been unjustly accused, profiled, and victimized. It was about her father, whose spirit she carried within her. It was about the future, about creating a world where her children wouldn't have to face the same injustices. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and looked the officers in the eye. "I will not be treated this way," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "I am a law-abiding citizen, a successful professional, and I deserve to be treated with respect." The officers exchanged glances, surprised by her sudden shift in demeanor. Amara continued, her voice rising with each word, echoing in the small, sterile room. "You have no evidence, no probable cause to detain me. This is racial profiling, plain and simple. And I will not stand for it." The room fell silent, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning and the distant chatter from the terminal. Amara held their gaze, her eyes blazing with defiance. The sting of injustice was still raw, but it was now mixed with a newfound resolve. She would fight this, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that favored the privileged and silenced the marginalized. The sterile room seemed to shrink around Amara, the hum of the air conditioning a mocking counterpoint to the storm brewing within her. Sergeant Davis's words echoed in her mind, "Folks like you." The casual dismissal, the ingrained prejudice, it ignited a fire in her belly. This wasn't just about a stolen wallet anymore. This was about generations of injustice, of being judged by the color of her skin rather than the content of her character. Her chest tightened, the walls of the room seeming to close in. Amara could feel her pulse quicken, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tasted the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, a primal response to the injustice that threatened to consume her. But then, another feeling arose, a defiant spark ignited by the memory of her grandmother, a pillar of their community, who had marched with Dr. King and faced down fire hoses and police dogs in the fight for civil rights. Grandma Rose's words rang in her ears, clear as a bell. "Never let them steal your voice, Amara. Speak truth to power, even when your voice shakes." Shame washed over her, hot and prickly. Had she let fear silence her? Was she allowing these officers, this prejudiced man, to diminish her, to define her by their narrow perceptions? No. She would not let them win. She would not let Grandma Rose down. Amara straightened her spine, her gaze unwavering. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice finding its strength, "I understand you're doing your job, but I need you to truly listen to me. I am not a thief. I am a respected businesswoman, a mother, a contributing member of my community. I have worked hard to get where I am, and I will not let anyone, not even a police officer, tarnish my reputation without just cause. Miller shifted uncomfortably, his youthful idealism clashing with the ingrained biases of his training. He glanced at Sergeant Davis, seeking guidance, but the older officer remained impassive, his gaze fixed on some distant point on the wall. "Where is the evidence against me?" Amara pressed, her voice rising with each question. "Who is this supposed witness? What exactly did they see? And where is Mr. Hartley? Why isn't he here answering questions?" Her words hung in the air, a challenge to the authority in the room. Miller fidgeted, his fingers drumming nervously on his belt. Davis finally turned his head, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Look, lady, we're just following procedure. If you cooperate, this will all get sorted out." "Cooperate?" Amara retorted, her voice edged with steel. "I've been nothing but cooperative. I've answered your questions, provided my identification, and yet you continue to treat me like a criminal. This is not procedure. This is prejudice." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the shallow breaths escaping Amara's lips. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears, a drumbeat of defiance against the injustice she faced. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, vivid and clear. It was her first day of college, a sea of unfamiliar faces, the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She had felt out of place, intimidated by the predominantly white student body. But then, a professor, a kind woman with a warm smile, had pulled her aside and said, "Amara, you belong here. Your voice matters. Never be afraid to speak your truth." That memory, that simple act of encouragement, had stayed with her all these years. It had given her the confidence to pursue her dreams, to break barriers, and to never let anyone dim her light. And now, in this sterile room, facing down injustice, that memory fueled her resolve. "I will not be silenced," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. "I will not be intimidated. I will not let you treat me like this." Officer Miller's eyes widened, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. Even Sergeant Davis seemed momentarily taken aback by her fierce determination. Amara stood tall, her gaze unwavering, her voice a beacon of strength in the face of adversity. She had found her voice, and she would use it to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by prejudice and discrimination. The small, sterile room felt charged with a strange energy as the officers processed Hartley's arrest. Amara, still buzzing from her confrontation with Hartley and the revelation of her identity, sank into the hard plastic chair, her legs suddenly feeling like lead. The adrenaline that had fueled her defiance was fading, leaving a residue of shaky relief and a lingering sense of unease. She closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping with the weight of the ordeal, and let out a long, shuddering breath. Officer Miller, his youthful face now flushed with a mix of embarrassment and admiration, approached Amara cautiously. "Agent Johnson," he said, his voice earnest, I apologize for the misunderstanding. We clearly made a mistake." Amara opened her eyes and met his gaze, a flicker of empathy softening her expression. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes and recognized the internal conflict he must be experiencing. She knew Miller was likely caught in a system that often favored the word of the privileged over the pleas of the marginalized. "Officer Miller," she replied, her voice calm but firm, "I appreciate your apology. This incident highlights the importance of thorough investigation and unbiased judgment, something I hope you'll carry with you in your future work." Sergeant Davis, his face etched with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. Amara didn't expect an apology from him. His ingrained biases were likely too deeply rooted to be easily dislodged. She simply offered him a curt nod before turning her attention back to Miller. As she stepped out of the room, a ripple of applause erupted from the gathered passengers. Some approached her with words of support and apologies for their initial judgments. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," a middle-aged woman said, her eyes filled with remorse. "We should have known better." A young man, his face flushed with admiration, extended his hand. "That was incredible, Agent Johnson. You really showed them." Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of solidarity with these strangers who had witnessed her ordeal. Their support, though belated, was a reminder that even in a world rife with prejudice, there were still those who valued truth and justice. But as she walked through the terminal, a new wave of anxiety washed over her, tightening her chest and quickening her pulse. The incident had already made its way to social media, and her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. News outlets were clamoring for interviews, and her name was trending on Twitter, a chaotic mix of praise and hateful comments flooding her feed. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a knot of apprehension forming in her stomach. Stepping out of the airport, the glare of the afternoon sun hit her like a spotlight, intensifying the throbbing in her head. A group of reporters surged forward, microphones thrust in her face, cameras flashing, their questions a cacophony of demands. "Agent Johnson, can you tell us what happened on the plane? How do you feel about being wrongly accused? What message do you have for other victims of racial profiling?" Amara, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of attention, retreated back into the relative safety of the terminal. She needed time to process, to strategize, to decide how to use this platform that had been thrust upon her. Just then, her phone rang, a familiar melody cutting through the noise. It was a mess. Evelyn, the elderly woman from the plane. "Agent Johnson," she said, her voice warm and reassuring, "I just wanted to check on you. That was a brave thing you did back there." Amara felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected ally, a wave of warmth countering the anxiety that had been building within her. "Thank you, MS. Evelyn. I appreciate your support." "Don't thank me, dear MS," Evelyn replied. "You did what was right. And if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." Amara ended the call feeling a renewed sense of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had allies, people who believed in her and were willing to stand by her side. As she pondered her next move, a woman approached her, her face etched with determination, her eyes radiating a quiet strength. "Agent Johnson," she said, extending her hand, "my name is Sarah Miller, and I'm a civil rights attorney. I saw what happened on that plane, and I want to help." Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her, the knot in her stomach loosening. This was the ally she needed, someone who could guide her through the legal complexities and help her amplify her message. Together, they would fight for justice, not just for Amara, but for all those who had been wronged by prejudice and discrimination. Before Amara could respond, a commotion erupted near the baggage claim area. Hartley, his face contorted with rage, was shouting into his phone, his voice laced with threats. "You'll regret this, Johnson," he bellowed, his eyes burning with fury. "I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." Amara met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a steely resolve. She would not be intimidated. She would not back down. This fight was far from over, but she was ready for it. She had found her voice, and she would use it to challenge injustice, no matter the cost. The terminal buzzed with a nervous energy as Amara, flanked by her newfound ally Sarah Miller, navigated the throng of reporters. Cameras flashed, blinding her with bursts of light, and microphones were thrust in her face, a forest of black foam obscuring the faces behind them. A barrage of questions bombarded her from all sides, each voice vying for her attention. "Agent Johnson, how do you feel about being wrongly accused?" one reporter shouted, his voice amplified by the aggressive shove of his microphone. "Is this a case of racial profiling?" another questioned, her tone sharp and accusatory. "What message do you have for the airline and the police officers involved?" a third demanded, his camera recording her every move. Amara paused, the cacophony of voices and the flashing lights threatening to overwhelm her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and met the eyes of the reporters, one by one. She knew this was a pivotal moment. Her response would shape the narrative, influence public opinion, and potentially determine the outcome of her fight for justice. "This incident," she began, her voice clear and resolute, cutting through the noise, highlights a deeply ingrained problem in our society: the insidious nature of racial bias and the unequal treatment of people of color, particularly within our justice system. I was fortunate to have the means to defend myself, but countless others face similar injustices every day without the same resources or platform. Sarah, standing beside her, a pillar of calm amidst the chaos, nodded in agreement. This is not just about one incident, she added, her voice steady and reassuring. It's about systemic change. We need to hold institutions accountable for their biases and ensure that everyone, regardless of their race or background, is treated with fairness and respect. Amara's words resonated with the crowd. A wave of murmurs and nods rippled through the throng of reporters. A few even lowered their cameras, their expressions shifting from sensationalism to genuine interest, a flicker of understanding in their eyes. Later that evening, Amara and Sarah sat in Sarah's book-lined office, strategizing their next moves. Legal pads filled with notes lay scattered across the mahogany desk, and a large whiteboard displayed a web of connections and potential strategies. We need to control the narrative, Sarah explained, her voice calm and methodical. We need to use the media to our advantage, to expose the truth and galvanize public support. Amara nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over her, but her resolve remained firm. I'm ready to speak out, she said, her voice filled with determination. But I want to do it strategically to maximize our impact. They crafted a press release, carefully wording their message to emphasize the systemic issues at play while avoiding any inflammatory language that could be used against them. They reached out to influential journalists and activists, sharing Amara's story and calling for accountability. The response was overwhelming. Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for Amara. Thousands of tweets and retweets flooded the platform, sharing her story, expressing outrage, and demanding change. News outlets across the country picked up the story, their headlines splashed across websites and television screens. Amara's interview on a national news program went viral, her eloquent and passionate call for justice resonating with viewers across the country. Comments poured in, praising her courage and expressing solidarity. Support poured in from all corners of society. Civil rights organizations offered their resources, legal experts volunteered their services, and ordinary citizens sent messages of encouragement and solidarity. Amara's story had touched a nerve, awakening a collective consciousness about the pervasive nature of racial bias and the urgent need for change. People organized rallies and protests, demanding accountability from the airline and the police department. Donations flooded into Sarah's legal aid organization, providing resources to fight similar cases of injustice. But not everyone was on Amara's side. Hartley, fueled by a mixture of anger and desperation, doubled down on his smear campaign. He hired a PR firm to discredit Amara, planting false stories in the media and unleashing a torrent of online trolls to attack her character and question her motives. Hateful comments flooded her social media feeds, and anonymous threats filled her voicemail. Amara felt the pressure mounting. The constant scrutiny, the hateful comments, the threats. It was a relentless assault on her spirit. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, her mind replaying the events on the plane and the vicious attacks online. Doubt crept in, whispering insidious questions. Was she doing the right thing? Was she strong enough to withstand this onslaught? But she refused to be intimidated. She drew strength from the growing community around her, from the messages of support, from the knowledge that she was fighting for something bigger than herself. She found solace in prayer, in the unwavering support of her family, and in the quiet moments of reflection where she reminded herself of her purpose. One evening, as she scrolled through her Twitter feed, a message caught her eye. It was from a young black woman, a college student who had seen Amara's interview. "Thank you for speaking out," the message read. "You've given me the courage to share my own story of discrimination. I'm not alone anymore." Tears welled up in Amara's eyes. This was why she was fighting. This was why she refused to be silenced. Her voice, her story, had the power to inspire others, to empower them to stand up for themselves and demand a more just and equitable world. The weight of Hartley's smear campaign pressed down on Amara like a suffocating blanket. False accusations and distorted narratives flooded the media, painting her as an opportunistic troublemaker seeking fame and fortune. Online trolls amplified the negativity, their hateful comments echoing through the digital sphere, each one a tiny dagger aimed at her heart. She found herself constantly checking her phone, a morbid fascination drawing her to the cruel words, the insidious doubts they sowed. Sleep became a luxury she could barely afford. The nights were filled with restless tossing and turning, the sheets tangled around her legs like the web of lies spun by Hartley's PR machine. Her mind replayed the events on the plane in an endless loop. The faces of the passengers, some judgmental, some indifferent, the sting of Hartley's venomous words, and the cold steel of the handcuffs against her wrists. Doubts gnawed at her. Was she strong enough to withstand this onslaught? Would she ever be able to clear her name and reclaim her life? But amidst the darkness, glimmers of hope emerged. Messages of support continued to pour in, each one a lifeline in the sea of negativity. They came from unexpected corners of the internet. A teacher in rural Kansas who used Amara's story to spark a classroom discussion about justice. A grandmother in Florida who shared her own experiences with discrimination. A young man in California who vowed to become a lawyer and fight for equality. These messages, filled with empathy and encouragement, reminded her that she wasn't alone. Sarah, her tireless advocate, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, countering the false narratives and building a legal case that would expose Hartley's deception. Amara often found Sarah's emails waiting in her inbox late at night, each one a beacon of determination and strategic brilliance. One afternoon, Sarah called with unexpected news. Amara, I've been contacted by a former police officer, Marcus Thompson. He wants to meet with you. A police officer? Amara was surprised. Why would he want to meet with me? He says he saw your interview and was deeply affected by your story, Sarah explained. He claims to have experienced similar discrimination within the police force and wants to help. Intrigued, Amara agreed to the meeting. They met in a quiet corner of a bustling coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans and the gentle hum of conversation providing a comforting backdrop to their tense encounter. Marcus Thompson was a tall, imposing man with a weathered face etched with the lines of hard-won experience. He sat with a rigid posture, his hands clasped tightly on the table, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. Agent Johnson, he began, his voice low and gravelly, each word measured and deliberate. I saw what happened to you on that plane, and it brought back a flood of memories. I spent 20 years on the force, and I saw firsthand how racial bias can poison even the most well-intentioned officers. I tried to speak out, to challenge the status quo, but I was silenced, ostracized, and eventually forced out. He paused, his gaze dropping to his hands, his knuckles white against his dark skin. Amara listened intently, her heart aching for the pain she saw reflected in his eyes. She recognized a kindred spirit in this unlikely ally, a fellow warrior who had battled the same demons from within the belly of the beast. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice soft but firm, your experience is a stark reminder that this fight isn't just about individuals. It's about changing the systems that perpetuate injustice. Marcus nodded, his gaze meeting hers with a newfound intensity. That's why I'm here. I want to help you expose the truth, to hold those responsible accountable, and to push for reforms that will create a more just and equitable police force. Amara felt a surge of hope, a warmth spreading through her chest that countered the chill of doubt and fear that had been plaguing her. With Marcus's insider knowledge and willingness to speak out, they could build a stronger case against Hartley and the officers involved. His testimony could be invaluable in exposing the systemic biases that had allowed this injustice to occur. But their alliance wasn't without its challenges. News of Marcus's involvement leaked to the media, and he faced a backlash from his former colleagues. Angry comments flooded online forums, branding him a traitor, a disgrace to the uniform. A segment of the public, clinging to the thin blue line narrative, accused him of betraying his fellow officers and siding with a criminal. Amara, too, faced criticism from those who questioned her decision to align herself with a former police officer, reminding her of the deep mistrust that existed between law enforcement and communities of color. Yet, Amara remained steadfast. She knew that building bridges across divides was essential to achieving lasting change. She and Marcus gave joint interviews, their voices a unified chorus against injustice. They spoke at town hall meetings, their words echoing in packed auditoriums, challenging the status quo and demanding accountability. They participated in community dialogues, sitting in church basements and community centers, facilitating conversations between police officers and residents, fostering understanding and building trust. In one such meeting, a young black mother tearfully shared her fear of her son being profiled by the police, while a veteran officer spoke of his frustration with the lack of diversity and training within the force. The raw emotions, the shared vulnerability, created a space for dialogue and understanding, a glimmer of hope in a landscape often marred by division. As the trial date approached, Amara and Sarah continued to gather evidence and build their case. They faced opposition at every turn, from Hartley's powerful legal team, who employed every tactic to delay and discredit, to the airline's attempts to downplay the incident and protect their reputation. But with each obstacle, Amara's resolve grew stronger. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a future where everyone, regardless of their race or background, could be treated with dignity and respect. The grand courtroom, with its towering marble columns and polished wood benches, buzzed with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Spectators filled every seat, their whispers echoing in the cavernous space like the rustling of leaves in a hushed forest. Journalists huddled in the designated area, their fingers flying across their keyboards, the rhythmic tapping a counterpoint to the murmurs of the crowd. Cameras were strategically positioned, their lenses trained on the key players. Amara, seated at the plaintiff's table, her face a mask of determined calm, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Hartley, radiating arrogance and defiance from the defendant's side, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting around the room. And Sarah, her lawyer, exuding an aura of quiet confidence, her gaze steady and focused. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, her face etched with years of presiding over complex cases, entered the courtroom. A hush fell over the crowd, a palpable wave of anticipation sweeping through the room. The trial, the state of Arizona v. Charles Hartley, had captured the nation's attention, becoming a symbol of the ongoing struggle for racial justice and corporate accountability. Sarah, in her crisp suit and with a voice that commanded attention, laid out the case against Hartley. She spoke with a measured cadence, her words precise and deliberate, meticulously recounting the events on the plane. She highlighted Hartley's false accusations, his condescending tone, his blatant disregard for Amara's pleas of innocence. She exposed his fraudulent insurance claim, weaving a narrative of deceit and entitlement that painted a damning picture of the defendant. She called witness after witness. The flight attendant who had witnessed Hartley's outburst, her voice trembling slightly as she recalled the scene. Passengers who had observed his interactions with Amara, their faces reflecting a mix of shame and indignation. And experts who testified to the inconsistencies in Hartley's story and the evidence of his deceitful intent, their voices resonating with authority and conviction. With each revelation, the courtroom buzzed with renewed energy. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, their eyes glued to the witness stand, captivated by the unfolding drama. Amara, though her heart pounded in her chest, felt a surge of empowerment with every truth revealed. She watched Hartley squirm in his chair, his face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of evidence. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, and his hands fidgeted nervously in his lap. Then came Marcus Thompson's turn to testify. He took the stand with a quiet dignity, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze steady and resolute. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the courtroom as he spoke of the systemic biases within the police force, the pressure to appease the wealthy and powerful, and the subtle ways in which racial prejudice could influence even the most well-intentioned officers. He recounted his own experiences with discrimination, his voice thick with emotion, his words painting a stark picture of the challenges faced by those who dared to challenge the status quo. His testimony was a powerful indictment of the system, a call for accountability and reform that echoed through the courtroom and beyond. The courtroom fell silent as Amara took the stand. She felt the weight of all eyes upon her, a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and judgment. But she drew strength from the faces of her supporters in the gallery. Her family, her friends, Ms. Evelyn, and even a few of the passengers from the plane. She spoke with a clear and steady voice, recounting her experience with a mix of vulnerability and strength. She described the humiliation of being wrongly accused, the fear that had gripped her, the cold steel of the handcuffs against her wrists, and the resolve that had fueled her fight for justice. Her words resonated with the audience, drawing tears from some, gasps of shock from others, and nods of agreement from many. Hartley's defense team, a group of high-priced lawyers known for their aggressive tactics, tried to discredit Amara. They paced the courtroom like predators, their voices sharp and accusatory, their questions designed to trap and confuse. They painted her as an attention seeker with a vendetta against their client, insinuating that she had fabricated the story for personal gain. They even stooped to thinly veiled racist attacks, their voices dripping with disdain as they suggested she was playing the race card to garner sympathy. But Amara held her ground, her gaze unwavering, her voice never faltering. She countered their attacks with grace and intelligence, her words cutting through their deceptive rhetoric like a knife through butter. The contrast between her honesty and Hartley's evasiveness was stark, and the jury, carefully observing every exchange, their faces etched with concentration, seemed to be swayed by her sincerity. Just when it seemed like the tide was turning in Amara's favor, Hartley's lawyers played their trump card. They introduced a surprise witness, a disgruntled former employee of Amara's company, a man with shifty eyes and a nervous tick in his cheek. He claimed that Amara had a history of making false accusations and manipulating situations to her advantage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, a wave of unease washing over Amara's supporters. She felt a surge of panic, her heart pounding in her chest. Had they found a way to discredit her, to undermine her entire case? But Sarah, ever vigilant, was ready with a countermove. She produced evidence that the witness had been fired for embezzlement, his face turning ashen as she revealed his past misdeeds. He had a personal vendetta against Amara, she argued, his testimony fueled by revenge and a desire to protect himself. The witness's credibility crumbled under Sarah's skillful cross-examination, his voice cracking, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate attempt to escape the scrutiny. The jury's attention shifted back to Hartley, his face now pale with a growing realization that his scheme was unraveling. The trial stretched on for days, each day filled with dramatic twists and turns. But through it all, Amara remained steadfast, her voice a beacon of truth and justice in the face of adversity. And as the jury finally filed out to deliberate, their faces etched with the weight of their decision, a sense of anticipation hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. The fate of Amara, Hartley, and the broader fight for equality hung in the balance. The clock ticked with agonizing slowness, each second stretching into an eternity as Amara waited for the jury's verdict. The courtroom, once buzzing with activity, was now shrouded in a tense silence, broken only by the occasional cough or the rustle of papers. Amara sat beside Sarah, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white with suppressed anxiety. Her mind raced, replaying every moment of the trial, every piece of evidence, every argument presented. Doubts, like insidious whispers, crept into her thoughts. What if the jury didn't believe her? What if Hartley's wealth and influence had swayed their decision? What if, despite all the evidence, justice wasn't served? A wave of nausea washed over her, and she felt a cold sweat prickling her skin. But then she looked around the courtroom, at the faces of her supporters, her family, their faces etched with a mix of hope and worry. Her friends, their eyes shining with unwavering loyalty. Ms. Evelyn, her wrinkled hands clasped in prayer, a silent beacon of strength. Marcus, his gaze steady and resolute, a testament to their shared struggle. And the many strangers who had been touched by her story, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and solidarity. Their eyes met hers, filled with encouragement and unwavering belief. She drew strength from their presence, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. The courtroom doors swung open, and the jury filed in, their faces etched with the gravity of their decision. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with a solemn expression, her lips pursed, her eyes avoiding any direct contact, handed the verdict to the judge. A hush fell over the room, the silence so profound that Amara could hear the rapid beating of her own heart, a frantic drum against her ribs. The judge cleared her throat, her voice amplified by the courtroom's acoustics, each word echoing in the sudden stillness. In the case of the state of Arizona v. Charles Hartley, she announced, on the count of false accusation, the jury finds the defendant. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, meeting Amara's eyes for a fleeting moment, guilty. A collective gasp erupted from the spectators, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the courtroom. It was followed by a surge of jubilant cheers and applause, a cacophony of relief and celebration that washed over Amara like a tidal wave. She felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging, a release of the tension that had been building for weeks. She had won. Justice had been served. The judge continued, her voice firm and resolute. On the count of insurance fraud, the jury finds the defendant guilty. Another wave of cheers erupted, louder this time, and Amara felt a profound sense of vindication, not just for herself, but for all those who had been wronged by Hartley's deceit and arrogance. The judge then addressed Hartley directly, her words carrying the weight of the law, echoing through the silent courtroom. Mr. Hartley, she said, your actions have demonstrated a blatant disregard for the truth and a callous indifference to the harm you have caused. You have abused your privilege and attempted to manipulate the system for your own gain. Hartley sat motionless, his face ashen, his eyes devoid of their usual arrogance. The bravado that had carried him through the trial had evaporated, leaving only a shell of a man facing the consequences of his actions. His shoulders slumped, his gaze falling to the floor, the weight of his defeat crushing his once proud demeanor. A tremor ran through his body, and a single tear escaped his eye, a testament to the utter collapse of his world. The judge sentenced Hartley to a significant prison term, a punishment that reflected the severity of his crimes and sent a powerful message that those in positions of power would be held accountable for their actions. She also ordered him to pay a hefty fine and restitution to Amara, stripping him of a significant portion of his ill-gotten wealth. The courtroom erupted in applause, a cathartic release of tension and a celebration of justice prevailing. As the gavel fell, a finality echoing through the room, Hartley's composure finally shattered. He sprang to his feet, his face contorted with rage, and launched into a tirade of accusations and threats. "This isn't over," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll appeal. I'll be back. You'll all regret this." But his outburst was met with silence, his words drowned out by the cheers of the crowd and the firm hand of the bailiff escorting him out of the courtroom. Stepping onto the courthouse steps, Amara paused, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. The sun was shining, the sky a brilliant blue, and a sense of hope filled her heart. She looked out at the crowd gathered below, a sea of faces representing all walks of life, united in their support. Banners waved in the breeze, proclaiming justice for Amara and equality for all. The air crackled with energy, a palpable sense of change and possibility. Amara raised her hand in acknowledgement, a wave of emotion washing over her. This victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, discriminated against, or silenced. It was a victory for her grandmother, for Marcus, for the countless others who had endured injustice. And it was a testament to the power of speaking truth to power, of standing up for what is right, even when it seems impossible. This is just the beginning, she thought, a surge of determination coursing through her veins. The fight for justice never ends. In the days and weeks that followed, Amara's story continued to reverberate throughout the country. She became a symbol of courage and resilience, her name synonymous with the fight against injustice. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and community events, her words echoing in grand auditoriums and intimate gatherings, sharing her experience and inspiring others to find their voices and challenge the status quo. The airline, facing mounting public pressure and the threat of further legal action, issued a public apology, and announced a series of reforms aimed at addressing racial bias and improving customer service. The police department, too, faced scrutiny, and calls for greater accountability and transparency echoed throughout the community. Amara's victory had sparked a movement, a collective awakening to the pervasive nature of discrimination and the urgent need for change. But she knew that the fight was far from over. There were countless others who continued to face injustice, and she felt a growing responsibility to use her platform to amplify their voices and advocate for a more just and equitable world. One day, as she sat at her desk, preparing for a speaking engagement, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. The constant demands on her time, the emotional toll of reliving her experience, and the weight of expectations were starting to take their toll. She longed for a moment of quiet, a chance to catch her breath and reconnect with herself. Just then, her phone rang. It was from a representative of a national civil rights organization. They were impressed by her courage and her commitment to justice, and they wanted to offer her a position as a spokesperson and advocate. Amara felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was a significant opportunity, a chance to make a real difference on a larger scale. But it would also mean stepping further into the public eye, facing new challenges, and taking on greater responsibilities. She closed her eyes, picturing the faces of those who had supported her, the messages of encouragement, the lives that had been touched by her story. "I'll do it," she whispered, a surge of renewed purpose coursing through her veins. A new chapter in her journey was about to begin, a chapter filled with both promise and uncertainty. But one thing was certain: Amara Johnson had found her voice, and she would continue to use it to fight for a world where everyone, regardless of their race or background, could live with dignity and equality. As she hung up the phone, a news alert flashed across her computer screen. "Hartley vows to appeal verdict," the headline screamed. A surge of anger mixed with determination pulsed through her. The fight wasn't over yet. But Amara was ready. She would face this new challenge with the same courage and resilience that had brought her this far. The final image of the chapter is Amara standing tall, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, her silhouette outlined against the cityscape. Her gaze is fixed on the horizon, a look of unwavering determination in her eyes. She is ready to embrace the future, to continue the fight, and to inspire others to join her in the pursuit of justice. Amara stood at a crossroads. The National Civil Rights Organization's offer was both exhilarating and daunting. Could she truly step into such a prominent role? Did she have the strength and resilience to lead a movement, to become a voice for the voiceless? Doubts gnawed at her. She longed for the familiar comforts of her life before the incident, her work, her family, her community. But the faces of those who had been wronged, the messages of support, the echoes of her grandmother's words urging her to speak truth to power, they all fueled her resolve. With a deep breath and a prayer for guidance, Amara accepted the offer. She dove headfirst into her new role, traveling across the country, speaking at rallies, meeting with community leaders, and lobbying for policy changes. Her voice, once silenced, now resonated in courtrooms, legislative chambers, and living rooms across America. She spoke with passion and conviction, her words weaving a tapestry of personal experience and systemic injustice, captivating audiences and igniting a fire for change. The media followed her every move, amplifying her message and fueling the growing movement for equality. The hashtag Justice for Amara evolved into hashtag Justice for All, rallying cry for systemic change that transcended racial boundaries. Newspapers ran front-page stories about her fight, television programs featured her in-depth interviews, and social media buzzed with her every word. But Hartley, despite his imprisonment and financial ruin, refused to fade quietly. Stripped of his wealth and social standing, he languished in a prison cell, his arrogance replaced by bitterness and resentment. He clung to the hope of overturning the verdict, of reclaiming his shattered reputation, of exacting revenge on the woman who had dared to challenge him. His lawyers, fueled by his desperation and the dwindling remnants of his fortune, launched a new wave of attacks, attempting to discredit Amara and paint her as a manipulative opportunist. The appeal trial was a grueling battle, a test of Amara's resilience and the strength of the movement she had inspired. But this time, she wasn't alone. A chorus of voices rose in her defense, legal experts dissecting the flaws in Hartley's arguments, community leaders testifying to Amara's character and the impact of her advocacy, and ordinary citizens sharing their own stories of facing discrimination and finding strength in her example. Marcus Thompson, now a respected advocate for police reform, stood by her side, his testimony a powerful testament to the systemic biases within law enforcement and the urgent need for change. The appeals court, after weeks of deliberation, upheld the original verdict, delivering a resounding blow to Hartley and a powerful affirmation of Amara's fight for justice. The news sparked celebrations across the country, a wave of jubilation rippling through communities that had long suffered in silence. Amara's name became synonymous with courage, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of equality. But the fight wasn't over. Amara knew that true change wouldn't happen overnight. It would require sustained effort, constant vigilance, and a willingness to challenge the status quo at every turn. She continued to speak out, her voice growing stronger with each passing day. She worked tirelessly to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace, meeting with CEOs and HR departments, advocating for policies that would level the playing field and create opportunities for all. She collaborated with law enforcement agencies to implement training programs that addressed racial bias and promoted accountability, facilitating workshops where officers and community members could engage in open dialogue and build trust. And she inspired a new generation of activists, young people who organized marches, rallies, and voter registration drives, determined to build a more just and equitable world. Throughout this journey, Amara's supporters remained steadfast allies. Marcus, now a consultant for police departments across the country, continued to advocate for reform from within the system. Sarah, her legal prowess sharpened by their shared battles, dedicated her career to fighting for civil rights and representing those who had been marginalized and silenced. And Ms. Evelyn, a constant source of wisdom and encouragement, became a beloved figure in Amara's growing network of supporters, her unwavering faith a reminder of the power of hope and perseverance. Years passed, and the seeds of change that Amara had sown blossomed into a movement that transformed the nation. The airline industry implemented stricter anti-discrimination policies, ensuring that all passengers were treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background. Law enforcement agencies across the country embraced reforms that promoted transparency and accountability, fostering greater trust between police officers and the communities they served. The story of Amara Johnson became a staple in classrooms and community discussions, a reminder of the power of individual courage and the transformative potential of collective action. The impact of Amara's fight extended beyond national borders. Human rights organizations around the world lauded her courage and used her story to inspire their own movements for equality. International news outlets featured her story, sparking conversations about racial justice and systemic bias in countries far and wide. One sunny afternoon, Amara stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, addressing a crowd of thousands gathered for a rally commemorating the anniversary of Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. She looked out at the sea of faces, representing all races, ages, and backgrounds, united in their commitment to justice and equality. She saw hope in their eyes, a shared belief in the possibility of a better future. "We have come a long way," she declared, her voice ringing out across the National Mall, strong and clear. "But the journey is far from over. We must continue to challenge injustice wherever we find it, to speak truth to power, and to build a world where everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background, can live with dignity and opportunity." As she finished her speech, a wave of applause erupted, a thunderous roar that echoed across the reflecting pool and into the annals of history. Amara looked up at the statue of Lincoln, his gaze fixed on the horizon, a symbol of hope and resilience. She knew that the fight for justice would continue, but she also knew that the seeds of change had been planted, and a more perfect union was within reach. The final image of the story is a montage of scenes: Amara embracing her family, Marcus leading a police training session, Sarah arguing a case in court, Ms. Evelyn comforting a young victim of discrimination, and people of all backgrounds working together to build a better future. The camera pans up to the sky, where a flock of birds soars freely, symbolizing the boundless potential of a nation striving for justice and equality for all. A message appears on the screen. The fight for justice continues. Find your voice. Make a difference. What did you think of Amara's journey? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends and subscribe for more videos like this.